Invite to come to St Helens. I'm going to be very referendum-like and give you two choices because I couldn't really make up my mind what to talk about. So I'll give you two choices and a quick show of hands what you prefer to hear. And as a mere servant of the people, I will do what you like. Would you like just a sort of general view on the mess that we're in? That's option number one, just the mess we're in. Or would you like a more focused discussion of why Boris Johnson's so-called backstop plans for the Northern Irish border, which are obviously the key to the current crisis, are such Indian rubbish? So who would like option number one, general view of where we are? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. View on the Irish border? Lots of people. Okay, Irish border it is. I left Belfast at the age of 18, so I never had to think about the bloody place again, and yet I spent my whole life talking about the Irish border. Okay, very quickly then, we all know how we got to this problem, and it is a genuine and very deep problem. It's because Theresa May decided not only were we leaving the EU, but we were also leaving the single market and the customs union as well, a decision that she took virtually on her own with her close advisors, for which there was no particular legitimacy in the referendum result itself, and certainly no wider public or parliamentary debate about. Now, the inevitable consequence of that, as we all know, if you leave the single market, you have regulatory barriers between two territories, the UK, including Northern Ireland, the EU, including the Republic of Ireland. That is inevitable. If you leave the customs union, you have tariff barriers between the two territories, the UK, including Northern Ireland, the EU, including Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland. And the only way not to have regulatory and customs barriers if you're going to leave the EU is if either Northern Ireland basically stays aligned with the EU on both those issues, which was the EU's proposed backstop, or if the whole of the UK stays aligned with the EU on those issues, which was Theresa May's backstop. Now, the backstop, both those backstops were rejected. Boris Johnson said that he had this great plan to come up with something else. So what did he suggest? Now, the first point to note here is that we don't have very much information because he's refused to make public the legal text of his backstop. We only have his letter and an explanatory memorandum. And it emerged today that the content of the letter and the memorandum do not tally with the content of the legal text. Yet another Boris Johnson lie. The actual documents which are public do not tally with the documents which are private. So we can only work on what we've got publicly. What does he say? How do you avoid regulatory barriers between Northern Ireland and the Republic, which would lead to a hard border? He says that Northern Ireland should just stay aligned with the EU when it comes to trading goods and environmental standards and so on and so forth. But there are a series of problems with this. It sounds good, you don't need a border if you're going to be aligned in regulatory terms, but there are a series of problems. First of all, in order to work, it would mean that the EU would have to adopt special rules in relation to Northern Ireland, which it doesn't apply anywhere else. Now, you might say that's not such a big deal because Northern Ireland is in a unique position, but basically the UK is saying, you change all of your rules to suit us. More importantly, he does say that although he's happy to see alignment in terms of sort of goods standards, there should be no level playing field guarantees. In other words, the rules which apply to the whole of the rest of the single market and every other country or territory which has a special relationship with the single market would not apply to Northern Ireland, inevitably giving British businesses a competitive advantage over all other European businesses. That is not credible. The next problem is, he says that this should all be dependent on the consent of the Northern Irish institutions, and that consent must be actively renewed every 4 years. Now, I hate to point it out to him, he doesn't seem to have noticed, the Northern Irish institutions have not been functioning for several years already, and they are based on the idea that the two main communities each have a veto. Basically what he's saying is the DUP has a constant veto over the continuation of the open Irish border. I can tell you, as a Northern Irish nationalist, that is totally unacceptable to people in the nationalist community. And finally, of course, it means that there's just constant uncertainty. You have no idea when that border will stay in place, you have no idea when it might fall apart. It simply is totally undesirable from the point of view of business, certainly. So his proposals on regulation, not very satisfactory. His proposals on the customs union are just bizarre, they're just weird. He basically says Northern Ireland will not form part of a customs union with the EU, it will stay in a customs territory with the UK. Now, as soon as you hear that, everyone else on the planet Earth says, well then you have to have a border. Boris Johnson says, no, that is completely compatible with not having any border at all. And of course the question is, well, where else on earth can we point to give us an example of how this is at all technically or physically possible? Because no other country on the planet has managed to do this. Besides enormous effort to try and do so, no other country on the planet has achieved it. What we get then is the usual list of Brexiteer fantasies about technology that doesn't exist. Trusted trader schemes will mean that you don't need to worry about checks. How many times do we have to say it? It's not the 5% of companies that are trusted traders, it's the 95% of companies that aren't trusted traders, which are why you need customs checks. He talks about, giving exemptions left, right and centre to different categories of business. It's all just fantasy, made up stuff. He also says again that there should be no level playing field guarantees between Northern Ireland and the rest of the rest of the island of Ireland or the EU, thereby massively increasing the incentive for cross-border smuggling and fraud and tax evasion, because if you don't have any level playing field guarantees, you've got an enormous incentive to engage in illegal activity and fraud. And of course, there's a simple fact that it means that for businesses in Northern Ireland, they would immediately become subject to tariffs. In other words, every time that Northern Irish milk is sent across the border to the Republic to be processed, you have to pay 40% tariffs on it. And then when it's sent back again to Northern Ireland to be packaged, another 40% tariffs. And then sent back to the Republic to be distributed, 40% tariffs. He's basically talking about bankrupting large sectors of the Irish and Northern Irish economy. Besides the paperwork involved in having to physically track from production to destination every single good manufactured in the whole of Northern Ireland. It is utter rubbish. I mean, it's not a serious proposal at all. It's an attempt to look like Boris Johnson has made his fair and reasonable compromise, when actually he's proposed something which will only be rejected by the EU, so that he can get his no deal and blame the EU for the consequences. But in a way, and this is my final point, in a way the most important thing about these documents isn't actually what they say about Northern Ireland or the Republic, it's what they say about the wider UK-EU relationship. Because Boris Johnson makes it clear that what he wants to do is rewrite the political declaration that was originally negotiated by Theresa May in favour of a much more distant future relationship between the UK and the EU. Now, don't get me wrong, Theresa May's proposals were already pretty distant. We were already talking about a significant step by the UK away from the European model of a social market economy. Boris Johnson basically wants to rip that up entirely and to leave the UK in a position where it simply has no obligations whatsoever, either towards the outside world or internally, about respect for workers' rights, respect for environmental protections, respect for public health standards, respect for consumers, any of those things. And he makes it clear as day that his vision of Brexit is hardcore neoliberal deregulation leading to an American-style economy rather than a European-style economy. Northern Ireland and the Republic are just a pawn in his game. He cares not the slightest about them, and these proposals are not serious or credible. This is all about delivering his Trump-style vision of a deregulated UK, with Singapore by the Atlantic and all the rest of it. So when the EU is very politely saying, oh, we think there are some major flaws in these which need to be discussed further, again, they're simply trying to avoid playing Boris Johnson's game of taking the blame for his non-existent plans. And on that note, I'll hand over to Mike.